The president and King Abdullah there met for about an hour behind closed doors before you saw them there taking reporters' questions. Trump wants Jordan and Egypt to take in about 2 million Palestinians from Gaza so he can turn the war-torn land into what he calls the Riviera of the Middle East. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also doubling down on Trump's deadline, saying return all Israeli hostages by Saturday or the ceasefire will be terminated. Let's bring in White House correspondent Karen Travers, foreign correspondent Britt Clement, who's in Jerusalem, also our ABC News contributor Mick Mulroy joining us in this conversation. Karen, let's start with you. Trump said right there he has a quote, magnificent plan for Gaza. But when King Abdullah was asked about the plan, really didn't give much support for the idea there.
Essentially saying, let's put the brakes on this right now and have more conversations with partners in the region. Let's talk with Egypt. Let's talk with other allies about the way forward there and what can be done to rebuild Gaza, if that's what the president is saying is a commitment that his administration is willing to make. The president was asked about the U.S. buying Gaza, and he said that that's not something that he is talking about doing. He said, we will take it, we will hold it, and we will cherish it. So he is continuing to push on that proposal of his where the United States would go in and somehow take over this sovereign territory. But Kira, you and I have talked about this, over these past week and a half now about the lack of details about how this would get funded when the White House says that U.S. taxpayers wouldn't be paying for it and who would actually do the rebuilding effort. The other big headline to come out of that there was the president saying that he was not threatening aid to Jordan over the issue of taking in displaced Palestinians. The president has been putting significant pressure on Jordan and Egypt to take in nearly 2 million people that are living in Gaza, whether that's temporary or permanent. It kind of depends on the day here. But the president said, no, we don't have to threaten that. He said, I do believe we're above that. Kira, just yesterday, he said it's conceivable that he would consider withholding aid to Jordan if they didn't give in to these demands. And it's a lot of money, $1.7 billion a year from the U.S. to Jordan.
Yeah, and a lot of back and forth. It's hard to keep up with what the president says many a times where he's in a situation like this. Britt, Israel is bolstering its forces in Gaza ahead of Saturday. What happens if this ceasefire falls apart?
Yeah, and Trump's comments very much sowing chaos here in the Middle East. We just heard from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu after he chaired a 4-hour cabinet meeting earlier on, coming out with this very much an ultimatum, saying the Gaza ceasefire will end if Hamas does not release those hostages. Now, there are conflicting reports about whether Netanyahu is demanding 3 Israeli hostages on Saturday or the 9 Israeli hostages. According to our sources, it looks like he's referring to those 9 Israeli hostages, but it's not clear exactly of a timeline. But what we have heard is from the IDF too, also saying they will now call up reservists. The IDF has already said it will reinforce its troops as a response to Hamas delaying the release of the hostages on Saturday. We also heard from far-right Finance Minister Smotrich calling on Netanyahu to inform Hamas either to release all the hostages or all the gates of hell will open on them. And that means, and he's referring to the Gazans here, no electricity, no water, no fuel, no humanitarian aid. And he goes on to say, we have all the international backing for this matter. Give the command, telling Netanyahu to break that ceasefire if they don't bring those hostages home immediately. Some foreboding words from Smotrich. If this falls apart, Kira, Gaza could be under renewed bombardment. The UN emphasizing that the aid situation is already dire. It also has huge risks for the hostages that still remain. We know there are 70-plus hostages still there, 6 Americans still held in Gaza. Segi Dekochen, he's a U.S. citizen who is meant to come out in phase 1 of this deal. So clearly Netanyahu has been emboldened by Trump's comments that he's doubling down on again. And there is plenty at stake here on both sides.
All right, Mick, could we see Israel retaliate in response to the conditions of Israeli hostages now, especially as the IDF is now confirming another hostage has died and his body is being held by Hamas?
Kira, I think that's quite possible, frankly. We've seen the reaction with just the state that the latest hostages were in when they were released. It's likely only going to get worse after that. And of course, many believe that the hostages, many of them already deceased. So this is going to enrage the Israeli population, and any delay, of course, is grounds for the end of the first phase of the ceasefire agreement, and it could mean that hostilities then resume, which would not be good for anybody. The hostages, and certainly not the people of Gaza, who are in desperate need of this humanitarian aid to continue. If anything cuts that off, they are on the brink of just an absolute disaster. So for all those reasons, hopefully this, at least the first phase, can get back on track. We'll see hostages come out and humanitarian aid continue to go in at scale into Gaza.